Today I engaged in a fun little exercise where I looked back through every single tournament match I have played in Edison Format, at least in the past year, and I made this whole spreadsheet with all the matchups and my win rate, just to see how I'm doing against all these different decks. My overall win rate came out to 30-13, which is about 70% win rate. I'm pretty proud of that. I think that's about as good as you can do in Edison Format. What with the sort of lack of consistency and the proliferation of sacky one-off power staples, at least across a small sample size or a large sample size. Obviously, we're here dealing today with a small sample size for all of these things, so just take all of the statements that I make with kind of a grain of salt in terms of generalizability, because we're not talking about that many matches with any of these decks. About half of the decks I've played against, I've only played against once. So, I mean, I'm not going to talk too much about those. I'm going to keep most of my main points to the other decks. But it was kind of an interesting insight, and I think a lot of this experience has kind of impacted my thinking on on the format in maybe a bit of a skewed or unfair way. So I'm going to get into that a little bit more later. So the first thing that ought to jump out at you about this list of statistics here is the Blackwing matchup. Now, Blackwings are the most represented deck in Edison Format. They usually are around 22 to 25% ish of the metagame at a given tournament, and they're nearly 1 in 4 of the matches I have played, so that roughly translates pretty accurately, I would say. But my win rate against Blackwings is like an insane 9-1, so like 90%, despite widespread perception that Blackwings is the best deck. Now, I'm going to sort of go into more detail about this. I checked all of these games because I'm like, all right, maybe I'm just running into a bunch of noobs on Blackwings, right? Because, newer players, they're attracted to this deck a lot because it's super easy to play. So maybe it's just like early rounds of the tournament, I'm running into like some new players who just showed up with Blackwings. But when I actually looked into this, about 7 of the games or 7 of the matches against Blackwings that I played have been against players that I knew to be good, like for sure. And only 3 were against just randos that I've never heard of. For example, last tournament I played 3 different Blackwing players, every one of which went 6-2 or better, and I 2-0'd every single one just because I was playing the fairy deck, and that shit's really good against Blackwings. So that sort of leads into my explanation for this, which is I'm kind of assuming that the reason for my really high win rate against Blackwings is to do with my deck building philosophy in this format, because my number one priority when building a deck is always just to I want it to beat Blackwings, consistently. Not oh, I want this to be 50-50 with Blackwing. No, I just want to beat the shit out of Blackwings. No problem. Don't even have to worry about this matchup, because you're going to run into it. It's the most represented deck. If you're going to a tournament, you're going to play a Blackwing player, probably. So I just want to, have a deck that I am confident will just beat the crap out of Blackwings. And because I approach the metagame with that as my sort of number one goal in mind when building a deck, this probably is sort of responsible for my very high win rate against Blackwings, and in turn, my very high win rate against Blackwings is kind of probably responsible for my misperception of the deck, because I've always maintained that I don't think it's the best deck, or it's debatable that it's the best deck. But now this has got me thinking that maybe Blackwings is actually just the best deck, and I'm a filthy metagamer who's just out here countering them. At least I think it's not a bad philosophy to have, of just I want my deck to beat Blackwings. I mean, if you can beat Blackwings, you can probably go pretty far in this format. But yeah, I do think my experiences in this small sample size have sort of fueled my misperception of the Blackwing deck as maybe not as good as other people think it is. I think I've had a tier list where I didn't even put it in S tier, and that is definitely not fair. It is at least an S tier deck, no question at all. So I think this has given me some interesting insight into myself and maybe my unfairness towards the birds in the past, because I think Blackwings are actually a pretty insane deck. So the second biggest contributing factor towards my high win rate is just miscellaneous meta decks. And honestly, this could just be chalked up to coincidence. I don't think there's anything about these 4 to 5 decks, the Stratos representing both Hero Beat and Diva Hero, that makes me particularly win against them often. I think I just have a high win rate overall, and you run into people who are on random known Edison decks, and you beat them in the early rounds of tournaments because they're not as good as you or whatever. And I guess like these are decks that I have at least 2 to 3 games against, as opposed to just one random game against. So I could this might just be a random coincidence that I have a high win rate against these 4 decks in particular. There's nothing I can really attribute to it. There's no pattern between these 4 decks. Their playstyles are completely like all over the place different. There's like Hero Beat, which is more like stun, and then there's Frogs and Quick Draw, or more control, and like Diva Hero Vayu, more mid range, sort of aggro ish. So they're just all over the place, and I kind of just have a big question mark hovering over why I'm doing well against these decks. So I don't know. You can feel free to speculate. So now we're going to be talking about what's driving my losses in tournaments, and the number one factor is clearly zombies. Now, similar to how my like small sample size of competitive experience against Blackwings has caused me to kind of systemically overrate that deck, I think the same is true with me. Or did I say overrate? I meant underrate Blackwings. But the same is true for me in terms of like overrating zombies. Like, I've had this take that I think zombies are the best deck, and that they're unfair, and that they're overpowered, and blah blah blah, and they're oppressive to play against. But I've looked back at this, and actually, like my games against zombies, in terms of playing against DB randos, like, just goes fine. But in tournaments, all my games against zombies are pretty much like Beast Mode and Xeris and Burndig and whatnot, just like these god tier zombie players who like top or win events all the time. So like I'm pretty much just running into zombies in late rounds of tournaments against players who are better than me, and then losing because, unlike Blackwings, I haven't like super mega preed for them. So I think maybe I've gassed up zombies a little bit too much on the channel. I still think they're a really good deck, for sure. Like, they're definitely one of the best decks. But in terms of like being the best deck or being above Blackwing, I think maybe I've kind of exaggerated that because of the fact that I'm just like randomly 1-4 against zombies. Which, again, this is like 5 games, but it's still one of the biggest drivers of knocking me out of tournaments. So I think that's sort of a neat insight into my potentially flawed perspective there as well. Alright, so people might say I'm making excuses here or whatever, but actually, mathematically, the second biggest contributor to the few losses that I do have is just like high roll bullcrap. Now, what I mean by this is like, it's self-explanatory, right? We all know what I'm talking about here. We know like these decks on the screen. These are the ones that I've lost to that are specifically are responsible for about a quarter of all of my tournament losses. Are like Norlaris, Handrip, Exodia, FTK, and the like Frog combo OTK like nonsense. Now, one thing I kind of like about Swiss format is that it's like obnoxious because you have to play more games, but also because you have to play so many games, I think it cuts down on the incentive to play stuff like this. Because okay, maybe with the Frog combo deck, if you have an optimal build and you play perfectly like Dimitri did at Rulers, you can maybe top with that. But like, you are never ever topping with these other, with like Norlaris or Exodia or whatever in Swiss format. It just will not happen. So I kind of do prefer, or at least like in that way, I can see the benefit of Swiss format a lot more. Because like whenever you lose to a deck like this, it's just annoying, right? And like Dragon Turbo is kind of an extension to this. I just didn't list it here because I only played against it once and I won. So, but like there's decks like this where you just feel like the outcome of the game was pretty much determined by like gambling and or whatever. Like, oh, this deck does this dumb combo some percentage of the time, and if they do, they win, and you can't do anything. So I don't know. No one likes playing against these, and I don't like to like talk shit on people or whatever, but yeah, no one wants to play against these decks, and they are responsible for like I said, about a quarter of my losses. So that's pretty annoying as well.